You too. We got top three bizarre missing. Never answered this fraud by Mr. Ballen. I know this is gonna be amazing. It's Mr. Ballen, like always. He's the GOAT. Always the GOAT. Make sure y'all like and subscribe. Let's get in this. Let's get in it.
Today, I'm going to be making a very special announcement at some point in this YouTube video. I'm not going to tell you what the announcement is now, of course, but I'll give you a little hint. We're going to be adding something to the Ballen universe. So be sure you stick around to hear today's announcement. Today, I'm going to share 3 totally bizarre missing person stories. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer the like button a nice fresh ice cream cone, but don't tell them you've secretly hid a glass shard in the middle of it. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories. On the afternoon of October 11th, 2016, a middle-aged man named Carlos Herrera Sr. entered the visitation area of a prison in Venezuela. The room itself sort of looked like a high school cafeteria with tables and chairs everywhere for the inmates and their visitors to sit down and have their meetings. And right in front of one was one table where there was this bedraggled-looking prisoner who he was there to meet. As Juan got closer to this guy, he could see he really looked terrible, the inmate. I mean, his cheekbones were sticking out, he was sort of emaciated, he was bloodied and bruised, he had bandages on his arm. And also, as Juan moved towards this guy, he could clearly see all the guards that lined the walls and the exits of this visitation area sort of squirm with discomfort, as this meeting is about to take place. And Juan had a good idea why these guards might be anxious. And that's because over the past month, this prison had been on lockdown because a gang inside the prison had risen up and overpowered the guards and completely taken over for this entire month. And just to be clear, during this month, people died as a result of this takeover. This was a horrible month for this prison, and it was only over the past couple of days that the guards were finally able to take back control. And Juan knew all this, not only because this riot was all over the news while it was going on, but also because his own son, Juan Jr., was serving time in this prison for robbery. He had been for the past year. However, Juan Sr. was not coming to visit his son right now. Instead, he was coming to visit a different prisoner, because during this riot, Juan Jr. had just disappeared. And Juan Sr., when he had found out about that, had called prison officials, other people, politicians, you name it, to try to figure out where his son went, but nobody seemed to know. And so finally, he had found this one prisoner, the guy he was meeting today, this beaten down looking guy, who had agreed to come forward and tell Juan Sr. what he knew about what happened to Juan Jr. And so Juan sat down at this table with this prisoner, and after the two of them introduced themselves, very quickly, Juan Sr. said, please, tell me what happened to my son, where is he? But this prisoner,
It's crazy, imagine your son in prison and you just disappear.
He was talking to didn't immediately get into sort of a clear story about Juan Jr. This guy began talking.
I told y'all, that's one of my biggest fears. If I ever go missing, nobody knows where I'm at, no trace, no nothing.
About a totally separate prisoner, a man named Doranhel Vargas. Vargas was notorious across Venezuela for a series of brutal murders he committed that ultimately.
This nigga chop. But I know some of y'all niggas is going, but it's not me. Some of y'all is going for that, but it's not me.
Ultimately put him in this prison. And during this recent riot at this prison, it was Vargas and his gang that rose up and took over. Vargas was in charge, effectively, of the riot. And so even though he was terrorizing people and brutalizing people and was very much responsible for the deaths of multiple inmates, he also at the same time did have to make sure that, the people he was in charge of, albeit illegally, had enough food, they had enough supplies, that they had the things they needed to survive. And so again, he's sort of dictatorial and awful, but also, ensuring people have basic resources. And so Juan Sr. is listening to this man sort of lay this out about Vargas and sort of how he was in control during this riot. And Juan Sr. is like, I just don't get it. Why are you explaining the nuances of what he was doing during the riot? And this prisoner very quickly pointed to the bandage on his arm and kind of pointed at all of his injuries that were very obvious. And he told Juan Sr. that if anybody got in
He's getting his butt taken. That's top of injuries.
the way of Vargas while he was in charge during this riot, they were basically beaten to within an inch of their lives, and again, in some cases, people were killed. I mean, this was a brutal regime. And so Juan Sr. is like, oh my goodness, is that what happened to my son? Was he beaten like you by Vargas? But at that point, the prisoner just shook his head and said no. And then he looked down and almost like couldn't make eye contact with Juan Sr. And he just said, what happened to your son was much worse. The prisoner would tell Juan Sr. that at some point during the riot, his son, Juan Jr., was tapped by Vargas to help with something. Now, it's not clear if Jr. went willingly or he was coerced, but we know that basically everybody had to do what Vargas asked them to do, otherwise they would be beaten or even killed. And so ultimately, Jr. agrees to help Vargas. And the thing he was tapped to help Vargas with was distributing food to the inmates. Because remember, despite how brutal Vargas was, he was in charge of providing basic necessities to all the inmates. And because of this riot, the prison had been locked down, and so food supplies had been restricted. And so inmates are beginning to starve, there's this big food shortage. And so Jr. was told, like, hey, you need to help us provide food to these inmates. So Jr. basically agreed to do it, at which point he was informed exactly what role he was playing in finding food. Instead of going out and looking for this food, Jr. was the food. Vargas and his gang cornered Jr., beat him to death, butchered his body, and then literally fed him to the inmates. That's what happened to Juan. After hearing this horrific
that brother's starving.
Ain't no way.
story, Juan Sr. was destroyed.
Y'all eating a whole human.
One of the first things he did is he went public and had this big press conference to tell the world about what happened to his son. But despite there being many eyewitness accounts,
You know how sick you gotta be to eat a whole human? That means they ate the butt too. They took his butt and ate it too.
ultimately, the Venezuelan government denied the cannibalism and nobody was ever held accountable. Duranhel Vargas remains incarcerated and he's never been charged with any crimes connected to Junior's disappearance.
That's crazy.
Is this nigga serious?
Okay, as promised, here is today's special announcement. As of right now, we have a brand new show, a history podcast. But wait, it's not like 8 p.m. on August 19th, 19... peak of episode 1. At around 8 p.m. on August 19th, 1962, a 12-year-old boy named Raimundo Marfa da Silva sat near the fireplace in the main room of a shack in rural Brazil. Raimundo lived in this shack with his father Rivelino, as well as his 2 younger brothers, who were fast asleep in their beds inside of this main room, only a few feet away. Raimundo and his family were very, very poor. I mean, the shack was very small. It was only composed of 2 rooms, the main room he was in right now, and also the kitchen, which was connected by a single door. And they were truly like out in the middle of nowhere in Brazil. They had no electricity, basically no money. I mean, they really had almost nothing. And so that night, as Raimundo sat by the fire, just kind of quiet, there wasn't really much else to do here, his father, Rivelino, came into the room from the kitchen and he sat down next to him. And the two just sat there quietly, periodically poking at the fire with a stick and just sitting there enjoying the silence, doing their best not to wake up the 2 younger brothers. And as these 2 were sitting there, suddenly Raimundo heard a strange sound coming from the kitchen. And so he turned his attention and he looked into the dark kitchen and he saw this.
Miss Mom, why would you put that? But I ain't gonna lie, if I see that, I'm just handling that real talk. Like, I ain't no pussy. I'm handling that. If I see that in real life, I'm killing it. Like, no.
Dark figure on
cap.
all fours, quickly kind of maneuvering across the ground out of sight. And immediately Raimundo's terrified. He has no idea what this is.
I ain't gonna lie. As I get up middle of the night, I hear a whole bunch of running. I'm not investigating. I'm running. They can take the house. I don't care. They can take the house. They can have
And so
it.
instinctively he turns to his dad,
take mine
and
if
his
they want
dad is also staring at the kitchen, wide-eyed, clearly having seen the same thing. And then before Raimundo could do anything, his dad jumped up and slammed the door shut, separating them from the kitchen, and locked it. And at that point, the two younger brothers, they've woken up, and all four of them are looking at each other like, what's going on? And Raimundo, he says to his dad, what was that? Now, it was clear that Rivellino was very unsettled by whatever this was. I mean, they didn't have pets. There was no other people inside of their shack. Like, there shouldn't be anything alive inside of the shack beyond them. So he doesn't know what it is. He's scared, but he tells his boys, it's okay. You know, it's all right. You know, I don't know what that is, but let's just stay here. We're safe. The door is locked. You know, we're all here. We're safe. And so the boys, they all just kind of trusted their dad, and everybody just kind of hunkered down together and just sat there quietly, kind of waiting to see if they would hear anything else. And for a little while, they heard nothing. There were no more sounds coming from the kitchen. But eventually, Rivellino and his sons began to hear voices, and they were coming from outside the shack. And at first, they couldn't really tell what these voices were saying.
It's GG's. They about to get their butt taken. That's the only way. The only way.
They were kind of garbled. But eventually, they all began to hear the same thing. Whoever was out there, or whatever was out there, was talking about Rivellino. Specifically, they could hear that name. And what they were kind of saying is, if Rivellino comes out here, we're going to kill him. And the moment that all the boys sort of picked up the fact that somebody's out there and they're threatening to harm Rivellino, they're all like, Dad, what do we do? What do we do? And Rivellino, I mean, he's hearing this too, but he tells his boys, it's okay. You know, I don't know what's going on out there, but clearly somebody is playing a cruel joke on us. This is a prank. This can't be real. And so Rivellino told his sons, their plan is they're just gonna stay put. They're in this room, they're safe, the door is locked. We are gonna wait until the sun comes up, and then we'll figure out who did
At that point, you just need to go outside, booty butt naked, BBN.
this, who's playing this prank on us. And so sure enough, Rivellino and his sons would stay in their room, barely sleeping, all the way until 6 a.m. when the sun began to come up again. And at that point, Rivellino told his sons to stay put, and he was gonna go out
How do you sleep after you hear somebody that's gonna kill you or your son or one of your family members?
there and investigate. You know, and by this point they had stopped hearing voices. You know, there were no more sounds coming from the kitchen. It sort of felt like whatever that was, whoever that was, had passed. And so, you know, the tension is gone, and the boys are like, okay, you know, be careful out there, Dad. And so Rivellino, he walks over to the door that leads into the kitchen. He unlocks it, opens it up, and Raimundo, you know, he's craning his neck, looking into the kitchen, but, you know, he can't see anything moving around in there, even with the light coming in. And so Rivellino, he says, okay, boys, stay here. And then Rivellino goes out into the kitchen and shuts the door behind him. And while he's out there, Raimundo and his brothers, they're all listening anxiously, you know, making sure their dad's not in trouble, but they just hear the sound of their dad just clearly walking around the kitchen. There's no commotion, there's nothing. And then a couple of minutes later, Rivellino comes back into the main room where the boys are, and he's got a knife in hand, but he tells them, you know, it's okay, you know, I got this from the kitchen, I'm just in case. There's nothing out here. I'm now going to go outside and just make sure nobody's outside the hut, okay? So again, stay put, I'll be right back. And so again, the boys, they're looking at their dad like, okay, we'll see you soon. Rivellino walked out again into the kitchen. He shut the door behind him, and then the boys heard the sound of the door that led outside open up. Okay. And then, presumably, Rivellino went outside. And that was the last time the boys ever spoke to their father.
Oh, I thought the last time.
6 months later, on March 10th, 1963,
GG.
5 men were out hunting in the wilderness not far from Raimundo's family's shack. And at some point, they came across this huge boulder. And this boulder had a big crevice in it, like a big gap in this rock. And one of the hunters happened to walk past it and looked into this crevice, and they found a skeleton. And that skeleton belonged to Rivellino, Raimundo's father. But that was not the end of the story, far from it. So on the day that Rivellino stepped out the front door and then was never heard from again, Raimundo and his brothers had been instructed by their dad to stay put while Rivellino went out looking around. But Raimundo just felt really nervous after his dad had stepped out the front door and had presumably stepped outside. So he defied his father, he opened up the door that led to the kitchen, and as soon as he did, he looked towards the door that led outside, and he saw it was wide open. And he saw his dad stepping into this huge cloud of yellow smoke.
Yeah. He's gone. Why would you step in the yellow smoke, bro?
And amidst this smoke were these like cylindrical objects that were floating in the air, spinning around in a circle, seemingly spitting out this smoke.
Nigga, what? What did you?
Floating in the air, and amidst this smoke were these like cylindrical objects that were floating in the air.
UFO. Yeah, he's dead. He's dead. He's
air, spinning around in a circle, seemingly spitting out this smoke.
Why would
And
you go
Raimundo,
outside?
he had no idea what he was looking at, but he saw his dad just kind of walking into this cloud, and then the smoke got so bad, it totally obscured his dad. His dad was gone. And so Raimundo yelled out for his dad, like, "Dad, where are you going?" And he charged towards his father to try to stop him. He just felt like, you can't go out there. But as soon as Raimundo went out into the yellow smoke, the smoke just dissipated, the cylinders disappeared, and as soon as it was all gone, his dad was gone too. Raimundo sprinted around
That's just the government. At that point.
his house, calling out for his dad, looking everywhere, but there was no sign of him. And so quickly, Raimundo and his brothers alerted authorities, and they launched this search for him, and for days they combed the area near that boulder as well, and they couldn't find Rivellino. And so eventually, they abandoned the search, and then 6 months later, his body was magically found in that crevice. To this day, nobody knows what actually happened to Rivellino and how he wound up inside of that rock crevice. Also, people have no idea what that dark figure was skittering across their kitchen floor the night before Rivellino went missing, or who those voices were threatening to kill Rivellino, or the objects that Raimundo apparently saw floating in the sky, spitting out yellow smoke. Nobody has any idea.
Bro, why would he go outside? Like, I know he was trying to protect his kids, but if you heard something real night saying, "I'm gonna kill you," and then you see smoke and you go in there, that's just natural
What any of
selection.
that stuff is. All we know is Rivellino disappeared and 6 months later turned up dead in that crevice.
RIP though. RIP both of those men from this story. Something. Action.
On the afternoon of June 1st, 2018, 36-year-old Luis Garcia headed into Mexico City to meet up with his older brother. The two of them were very close. They had been through a lot together. When Luis was 14 years old and his older brother was 15, their parents had gone through a really messy divorce, and during it, their father had just walked out on them and they never saw him again. And shortly after that, their mother remarried and her new husband moved in with the family, and shortly after that, their mother just vanished. And the boys, they asked their stepfather, like, "Where is she? Where's she?"
What? I hear that right?
During it, their father was very close. They had been headed into Mexico City to meet up with his older brother. The two of them were very close. They had been through a lot together. When Luis was 14 years old and his older brother was 15, their parents had gone through a really messy divorce, and during it, their father had just walked out on them and they never saw him again. And shortly after that, their mother remarried and her new husband moved in with the family, and shortly after that, their mother just vanished. And the boys, they asked their stepfather, like, "Where is she? Where's she gone?" But the stepdad would
So the father just walked over. He was like, "No, I'm getting the milk." Same with my dad. So they father just did what my dad did. Just walked away. Then the mother just went missing. Yeah, that family's over.
say, "I don't know, she went out on an errand and she never came back." And the boys, I mean, they were very suspicious of their stepfather because this did not feel like something their mom would do. Like, she would not abandon them. But just a couple of days after their mom disappeared, their stepfather disappeared too. And so all of a sudden, these teenage boys are just left to fend for themselves. Now, the boys would contact police, and specifically they said, like, "Hey, we think something happened to our mom. We think maybe our stepdad had something to do with it, but everybody's abandoned us." And the police would launch an investigation and they would go looking for their mother,
Oh, that's actually
but they couldn't
crazy. Like, just imagine your dad just left. Then you was like, "Okay, I still got my mom." Your mom just disappeared.
find her. and they couldn't find the stepfather or the biological father. And so after the police wound down their investigation, the two boys, again, they've been orphaned now and they, learned to fend for themselves, but they never stopped looking for their mom. For nearly 2 decades, they continued to search Mexico City for their mother, and they just could never get any sort of closure. They really didn't know what happened to her. And so today, the two brothers had met up, not to go looking for their mom, but instead to meet at their childhood home. So after their mother and stepfather and their biological father had abandoned them, the two boys had lived in the childhood home on their own, fending for themselves. They had grown up there. And then eventually, when they were old enough, they had moved out and started their own adult lives on their own, but they had never sold the house. They had just kind of kept it in their possession and let it sit there. But now they were going back to, go through and sort of clean it up and, decide if they wanted to do some renovations and just kind of fix the place up, maybe to sell it. They didn't know. And so the two brothers, they met up at the home, they go inside and, there's still photos on the wall, old family photos. And there's, all these memories that come rushing back, many of which are very sad and troubling. But, like the brothers, they're having a good time, just kind of going down memory.
No, that's crazy. Like, there's legit no answers. Like, both they mom just disappeared, and there's like no trace of it.
Lane. And at some point, they decide, okay, you know what? Not only are we going to clean this place out, but also there's some basic renovations that really need to happen here. Like the place has been sitting here for years. It's sort of fallen into disrepair. Let's fix this place up. And so over the next couple of days, they would call in some contractors to begin to do some basic renovations in the house while the brothers continued to clean it up and pack things up and sort of get it ready for whatever it was going to be. And on one particular day, when a group of contractors were working in the master bedroom, the brothers were in the living room doing their own thing when they heard a big commotion coming from the master suite. One of the contractors began yelling for the brothers to get in here and look at what he had found. As the two brothers, they got up, they bolt into the master suite.
Wait, can I predict it? Let's say like the stepfather murdered the mother and just put it somewhere in the house.
And they look at something that was just sitting on the ground. And at first, they didn't even know what they were looking at. But then the contractor, after composing himself, told them what it was. And suddenly, the boys understood what had happened to their mother. It would turn out the brothers were right. Their mother had not simply gone out and abandoned her sons. Instead, on the day their mother left and never came back again, somehow or another, she was bound and gagged and stuffed inside the wall of their family home. And we know this because when that contractor 2 decades later was doing renovations for the brothers inside that home, his sledgehammer went into the wall in the master suite, and when he pulled it out again, a white object came tumbling out of the wall. And that object was their mother's skull. And after pulling apart the wall and looking inside, they would find the rest of her skeleton.
Imagine you don't know where your mom went, and like he said 2 decades, so 20 years later, when you're in your 30s, 40s, you just now find out that she was in the walls, dead, her whole body.
Clearly bound and gagged. And then perhaps most disturbingly of all is that in the wall, they would also find all these scratch marks, suggesting she was alive when she was put in there, which means she was in there desperately trying to get the attention of her sons to save her, but nobody could hear her. Following this horrific discovery, the two brothers went to police in Mexico City and told them what happened. And the police would come to the house, they would look all over the place and try to figure out, what happened to their mother, who killed her. But they couldn't solve it. Now, the police always did suspect that the stepfather very likely had some level of involvement here, just given the fact that he himself went missing a couple of days after the mother did. But they could never locate him, and very likely they never will, because today he'd be well over 90 years old and is very likely already dead.
90? Old ass.
And now, from Ballen Studios,
WVO by Mr. Ballen. That was the top 3 bizarre missing, never answered this fraud, missing cases ever by Mr. Ballen. That was a W. Make sure y'all like, comment, subscribe. I'm gonna see y'all next one. 6 months. Stand by goals, stand by God, and peace.